Well, hello, and welcome to the Council on Occupational Education's Professional Development and Learning Series. I'm Sheila Luke, and I'm Vice President of the Compliance Division, and I'm here to talk to you today about developing an institutional teach-out plan. Now, before we get started today, I want to make sure that you're clear on the difference between an institutional teach-out plan and a programmatic teach-out plan. A programmatic teach-out is a process that the institution engages when it decides that it will no longer offer a program at the institution. There is a programmatic teach-out application in Advera that you'll fill out, and those programmatic teach-outs can be approved by COE staff. However, in this video, we're going to focus on the institutional teach-out plans. And as you will learn, this process involves the closure of the entire institution. Now, like many of you, I began my career as a teacher, so I'm accustomed to taking that approach whenever I facilitate a session. So in that fashion, I've outlined the learning objectives of this session so that it is clear on what I plan to communicate to you during this video presentation and what you should expect to learn from it. Now, first, I'm going to introduce some terms that are used to describe various aspects of the institutional teach-out process. And I think that you'll find it very helpful to understand some of the language that is used, so I'll define those terms for you. Next, I'm going to discuss some of the events that could occur that may require that you submit an institutional teach-out. In situations when an institutional teach-out plan is required, it's very important to make sure that the institution adheres to specific regulations imposed by the U.S. Department of Education. So we'll discuss some of those requirements and specifically what COE requires of the institution that must submit an institutional teach-out plan. We're then going to talk about the process of how institutional teach-out plans are reviewed and how they receive approval once they've been submitted to COE. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how you may find information and resources that will help you submit an institutional teach-out plan should you find yourselves in that situation. Now, what is a teach-out? Well, a teach-out is a process by which a program, an institution, or an instructional location that provides 100% of at least one program engages in orderly closure. When following the closure of an institution or campus, another institution provides an opportunity for students of the closed school to complete their program regardless of their academic progress at the time of closure. Now, this is what the U.S. Department of Education says about a teach-out, and it sort of blends in other aspects of the teach-out. So it mentions a teach-out agreement, which we're going to talk about a little later. Now, the point I want to focus on here is that this is indeed a process, which implies that there are multiple steps to it. Also, it talks about the teach-out should be done orderly, which means that careful and thoughtful planning is needed. Now, I want to point out, too, that the concept of a teach-out can apply to a program closure, which we talked about earlier. However, my focus today is on the institutional teach-out, which relates to the closure of the entire institution or the closure of an instructional site that belongs to the institution. Now, in order to further understand this concept of the teach-out, we need to talk about a teach-out plan. Now, remember, I said that teach-outs require careful and intentional planning, and that's where the teach-out plan comes into play. Now, COE has a definition for a teach-out plan, and that definition says a teach-out plan is a written plan developed by an institution that provides for the equitable treatment of students if an institution or institutional location that provides 100% of at least one program ceases to operate before all enrolled students have completed their program of study. Now, with an understanding of the institutional teach-out process and that a teach-out plan is a formal written agreement that outlines how the institution will implement the teach-out process, you may be wondering now, when might an institution or when might you be required to submit an institutional teach-out plan to COE? Well, COE requires the submission of an institutional teach-out plan when any of the following things may occur. The U.S. Department of Education notifies us that it's taken action against the institution to limit, terminate, or suspend the institution's Title IV eligibility. The Commission of the Council on Occupational Education acts to withdraw, terminate, or suspend the accreditation of an institution, or a restrictive status is placed on the institution, such as probation status or show cause order status. Another case might be the institution notifies COE that it plans to cease operations or to close at the main campus or at any other campus or site operated by the institution before all of the enrolled students have completed their programs. Okay. Or finally, a state licensing agency or authority may notify COE that your institution's license or its legal authorization to provide an educational program has been or will be revoked. Now, while there may be other events that may require that you submit an institutional teach-out plan, these are probably the most commonly encountered. Now, it's important to also note that the institution must comply with all state and federal regulations and guidelines when it is closing and an educational program or the entire institution is closing. Now, you'll recall that the definition of a teach-out plan mentioned that the plan should provide for the equitable treatment of students. So to provide some context to the equitable treatment of students, I remind you of COE's mission statement, which says our mission is to uphold quality, integrity, and continuous improvement in occupational education, meeting the evolving needs of students, employers, and communities. Okay, so the key part of that mission statement is the students. And in situations where an institution or an instructional site engages in a teach-out, the institution still has an obligation to uphold quality and integrity and to ensure equitable and fair treatment of those students. So a teach-out plan must provide for the equitable treatment of students by ensuring that all the students are provided all the instruction that they would have received by the institution had it not been closing. The institution that is closing should also ensure that it complies with all state, federal, or other regulatory agency requirements to make sure that students are placed and that they have an opportunity to finish their programs. Third, ensuring that students are notified of an additional requirement, such as the charges that they may incur as a result of completing their program at another institution, should the teach-out plan involve the teaching out of students of another institution. Now, when you find it necessary to conduct an institutional teach-out, you must specify how you plan to teach out the students. Now, generally, there are two options when it comes to teaching out students in the institutional teach-out. You may plan on teaching out all of your students on your own, meaning that you will orchestrate the teach-out in such a way that allows for your students to finish their programs of study before you close. This is what we call an internal teach-out. Another case might be conducting the teach-out that may involve another institution, in which case you'll form an agreement with that institution, known as a teach-out agreement, where you make arrangements for students to complete their programs of study at another institution. Now, when I talked about the types of institutional teach-outs, I introduced another concept there related to teach-outs, and that is that of a teach-out agreement. The U.S. Department of Education is very clear on the definition of a teach-out agreement. Now, a teach-out agreement is a written agreement between institutions that provides for the equitable treatment of students and a reasonable opportunity for students to complete their programs of study if an institution or an institutional location that provides 100% of at least one program offered ceases to operate or plans to cease operation before all of those students have completed their program of study. So you see the same theme there that we've discussed before in terms of this being a written agreement. It provides for the equitable treatment of students with the closure of an institution, a program, or instructional site. Now, the idea of an agreement here implies that the institution or program that is closing is going to partner with another entity, typically another school, to conduct the teach out. And in these cases, when the closing institution will partner with another institution to facilitate that teach out, an application must be submitted with the teach out plan for commission approval. So in addition to completing a teach out plan, you'll also have to submit an application indicating that you're entering into agreement with another institution. Now, as was the case in general with a teach out plan, a teach out agreement must provide for the equitable treatment of students by ensuring that the agreement is between institutions that are accredited or that are in candidate status with an accrediting agency that is recognized by the U.S. Secretary of Education. The teach out institution is geographically proximate to the closed program or institution, so it should be relatively close to your institution that's closing. The teach out institution will remain stable and be able to carry out its mission and meet all those obligations to the existing students prior to closing. And the teach out institution must be able to demonstrate compatibility of the programs and structures that it offers to that of the closed institution. And the teach out institution should be able to provide students with information about any additional charges that they will incur if there are any. Now, teach out of another institution for a COE institution that is teaching out of students must notify and receive commission approval prior to teaching out students of another institution. Now, the teach out of programs that are not currently offered by the COE institution may require a focused team visit in the event that the teach out requires special safety precautions and procedures. So you have to make sure that the institution that's receiving the students can offer the same quality and same caliber of programs. Okay, by now, you should have a pretty good understanding of what an institutional teach out plan is and what events or circumstances may require that you submit an institutional teach out plan to COE, and also the types of institutional teach out plans that you may submit. So now what you're probably thinking about is, how do I develop an institutional teach out plan? Well, lucky for you, COE has developed an institutional teach out plan template that outlines exactly what should be included in a teach out plan. Now, at the very minimum, an institutional teach out plan should include the following information. You should include an overview and background information that provides an explanation for the circumstances requiring the institution to submit an institutional teach out plan. You should also include a timeline that outlines the teach out process in terms of when important events and activities will be taking place. Now, the timeline should also designate when the institution plans to complete the closure of the school, or when the teach out plan will be complete. The institutional teach out plan should also include a communication plan, which details how you plan to notify students and other stakeholders of the impending closure. And with this communication plan, you want to make sure that you include multiple modes of notification. For example, you may send out emails to students and to stakeholders, but then you also may follow that by sending out a written communication in the form of a letter. So communication plans typically involve more than one mode. Now, you should also provide a listing of each academic program by location, offered where you specify the total clock or credit hours, the number of students currently enrolled in each program, and statements of assuring attesting to the equitable treatment of the students. This information is best presented in a table format. So it's a little bit more organized if you can present this information in the form of a table. Now, also as a part of the Teach Out plan, you should provide information about the students that are in each program and provide an estimate of the time that it's going to take them to complete their programs. Now, this is very important. The institution or you should not include any personally identifiable information known as PII. You can include student identifiers, such as a student number that's assigned to the students for identification purposes, but this should not be the student's social security number. Now, an institutional teach out plan should also describe the scope of services that are going to be available to students throughout the teach out process. So this could include, but it's not limited to, any advising services, counseling services, or how students may access their records or transcripts or catalogs for the institution, and any other information that they may need that will assist them in transferring to other institutions. The institutional teach out plan should also include a description of financial resources and budgetary considerations that are appropriate for the teach out process. Okay, we want to make sure that the institution has the financial resources and that it can remain stable throughout the teach out process. And then finally, in cases where institutions partner with other entities to conduct the teach out of students, a copy of the teach out agreement between the entities involved must also be submitted for review and approval. The teach out agreement could require separate approval from the teach out plan by the commission. Finally, in cases where member institutions partner with other entities to conduct a teach out of students, a copy of the agreement between the entities involved must also be submitted for review and approval. The teach out agreement may require separate approval from the teach out plan by the commission. So it's important to note that the institution does not need to formally enter into the agreement with the teach out institution unless the closure is imminent. Now, if you want to find further information on these components of the Teach Out plan, this information is detailed on the Teach Out template that's located on the COE website. And I'm going to show you a little bit later how you can find that template. Okay, now that you've developed an institutional Teach Out plan and submitted that plan to COE, what's going to happen next? Well, after the institutional Teach Out plan is received by COE staff, then it's going to be assigned to two different readers who are readers of the Commission Review Committee, also known as the CRC. Now, the Commission Review Committee is established by the Commission as a standing committee, and the function of this committee is to review institutional materials and/or documents such as the institutional Teach Out plans. Now, the CRC readers will review the Teach Out plan to ensure that it contains the required elements as I've previously described, and it will also evaluate the plan to ensure that it is reasonable and provides for the equitable treatment of students. Now, upon review of the Teach Out plans, the institutional Teach Out plans, the CRC has two options. If the readers decide that the institutional Teach Out plan contains all the required information and it presents as a reasonable plan, then the CRC may recommend the Teach Out plan to the commission for approval at its next meeting. Now, if the readers determine that the Teach Out plan has missing elements or it contains questionable content, then they're going to revert that plan back to you and request that you provide additional information. Now, this process will continue until the institutional Teach Out plan can be recommended to the commission for approval. So it can go back and forth in that loop until the readers decide that the plan is ready for commission approval. Now, finally, what is the process to submit an institutional Teach Out plan to COE? Well, the first thing to do is to locate the institutional Teach Out plan template on the COE website. Now, the template can be found by navigating to the Resources tab and then accessing the Applications and Forms section, and then you'll scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page. So I will demonstrate that process to you now. So on the website, you'll go to Resources, and then you'll scroll down to Applications and Forms. And once there, you're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. In the section where it says Other Forms. And then when you look at the second form here, it says Teach Out Plan Template. So you would simply click on the arrow and download the Teach Out Plan template. Now, after you have downloaded the template and completed the institutional Teach Out Plan, then you will submit it through Advera in the COE document submission area, and COE staff will receive the Teach Out Plan in that manner. Thank you for tuning in to this video on institutional Teach Out Plans. If you have any questions about submitting an institutional Teach Out Plan, feel free to reach out to me, Sheila Luke, Vice President of the Compliance Division. Have a great day.